Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever crossed paths with someone who changed your life in a way you never saw coming? Someone who walked in quietly, yet left behind a lesson you'd carry forever. This is a story about a single dad, a little girl with a brave heart, and a soldier whose final days held more weight than anyone realized. It's a story about the smallest acts of kindness and how they echo in places we never expect. If you're ready, settle in, take a deep breath, and let this story remind you that even in the quietest corners of life, greatness can be hiding in plain sight. The hospital always sounded the same at this hour. Late afternoon, when the light outside was fading and the VA ward slipped into that strange hush between day and night. Machines hummed in the distance. A monitor beeped somewhere down the hall, steady but tired. A metal cart squeaked as a nurse pushed it toward the elevators, her footsteps fading until everything drifted back into that muted, lonely quiet. Hazel Ward stood in room 306, barely breathing. The bed was empty. Not just empty, stripped. Sheets gone. Blanket gone. Mattress bare and cold. The faint smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. The pillow her friend used to gripe about feels like sandpaper he'd growl was gone too. The old man who always complained, always barked, always insisted he didn't need anyone, wasn't here. Hazel clutched the little army green tin box tight against her chest. The metal was cold against her fingers. Letters scratched into the lid spelled, "For Hazel Ward only." The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. Her voice came out thin. "Mr. Leo." Only the soft rumble of the air conditioner answered. A long, low exhale that filled the emptiness. Hazel swallowed hard, her heart fluttering in her ribs. Her dad always told her not to wander into patient rooms, not to draw attention. Be invisible, he said every day before work. But she'd broken that rule for weeks. She'd sneak down this hall after school. She'd bring lemon shortbread cookies she made herself even when they came out lopsided. She'd sit on the old man's chair and let him fuss at her while he secretly ate every crumb. And now, nothing. The silence felt wrong, heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. Hazel stepped back toward the doorway. Her shoes whispered against the floor. For a moment, she wondered if maybe the nurses had moved him down the hall. Maybe he'd demanded a room near the window. Maybe everything stopped. The hum of the ventilation, the faint shuffle of nurses, even the faraway beep of the monitor. Silence, clean, abrupt, washed through the corridor like a switch had been thrown. Hazel froze. Then she heard it. Bootsteps. Heavy. Steady. Unmistakable. Thump. 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 Each step echoed off the tiled floor. Not rushed, not careless, a rhythm that carried weight and certainty like someone who expected the world to shift out of their way. Hazel peeked around the door frame. Down the long hallway, doctors and nurses were stepping aside without being told. Shoulders straightened. Voices dropped. A line of 8 uniformed officers marched in formation, the synchronized stomp of their boots shaking something deep in Hazel's small chest. At the center walked General Aurora Keaton. Hazel had only seen generals in photographs, stern portraits on hospital walls, eyes, cold shoulders, stiff. But seeing one in person felt like standing in front of a storm. Aurora's presence rolled down the hall long before she stopped walking. Her uniform was crisp, the faint clink of her metals brushing against one another with each step. Even from a distance, Hazel sensed something sharp about her, controlled, pointed like a blade, kept polished. The officers stopped in unison outside room 306. Aurora stepped forward, her boots coming to rest inches from Hazel's sneakers. Her eyes swept through the doorway, scanning the empty bed, lingering on the abandoned heart monitor, the chair Hazel had sat in just yesterday. Then her gaze lowered. To the tin box Hazel was trying to hide under her jacket. Hazel's breath hitched. Aurora's voice was deep calm but carried a command that made Hazel straighten instinctively. Where is Colonel Leonard Maddox a beat? And where is the girl who brought him lemon shortbread cookies? Hazel felt the question like a hand closing around her spine. Before she could speak, someone moved behind her. Caleb Ward, her father, had turned from where he'd been mopping the floor near the supply closet. His mop clattered softly against the bucket as he stepped forward, instincts snapping awake. His boots weren't polished. His uniform wasn't a uniform at all, just a janitor's gray shirt worn soft with age. But his movement had that old precision Hazel recognized, the one he tried not to let others see. Caleb's voice was low-guarded. "Ma'am, is there a reason you're questioning my daughter Aurora?" Finally tore her gaze from Hazel and lifted her chin, studying the man between them. Her eyes narrowed not in hostility, but in recognition. Not the kind of recognition that came from memory. The kind that came from seeing the way someone stood, the way someone breathed when tension thickened the air. Caleb Ward still carried the military in his bones. Aurora took one step closer, her shadow falling across the doorway. "Mr. Ward," she said, each syllable firm enough to quiet the entire hall, "we need to talk. Now." Hazel's heart thumped loud in her ears. Bootsteps shifted behind the general. Metal gear clinked softly. Somewhere down the hall a nurse exhaled shakily. Caleb didn't move. He simply looked at Hazel, one silent, steady glance that said, "Stay behind me." The officers adjusted their stance. Aurora waited. Hazel clutched the tin box so tight the lid pressed into her palms. She didn't know what was inside besides the coin and the slip of paper. She didn't know why Mr. Leo wanted her to have it. She didn't know why a general had just walked into their lives like a storm front. But she felt it deep in her small, frightened chest. Nothing about this moment was ordinary. The hall felt too still, the air too heavy. And then Aurora's boots took a single step forward. Hazel's pulse jumped. Caleb didn't speak again as General Aurora Keaton led them down the corridor. The officers flanked her like a wall, their steps a steady drumbeat behind Hazel and her father. Hazel kept her hand curled around the metal tin in her pocket, feeling every groove of its scratched lid. With each echoing footstep she wondered if Mr. Leo had known this moment would come. The man who grumbled about everything. The man who insisted he didn't care. The man who somehow left her a box that felt heavier now than anything she had ever held. But the hall soon faded into a blur of uniforms and clipped instructions, and the next hour dissolved into questions Hazel couldn't follow. Adults talking quickly. A general speaking calmly. A nurse apologizing. A doctor shaking his head. Hazel standing behind her father's leg like a small shadow. By the time they left the hospital, Hazel's head buzzed with more confusion than fear. Caleb didn't say a word until they reached the car. Only when he shut the door did he exhale, hands tightening around the steering wheel. "We'll figure this out," he murmured mostly to himself. Hazel nodded, though she didn't truly understand what needed figuring. The only thing she knew, Mr. Leo was gone. And he'd left her something. The memory came back to her as clearly as if someone had whispered it in her ear. Back then, the hospital didn't feel dangerous or mysterious, it was simply where her dad worked. Caleb Ward, single-father janitor at the VA Medical Center, the man who could fix anything except the things that truly hurt him. He moved quietly through the halls, pushing his mop cleaning spills, unclogging sinks, replacing broken bulbs. Hazel always wondered why he did everything so carefully, so gently, like even the floor tiles deserved respect. He never raised his voice at anyone. He never complained. He just worked. Every day after school, Hazel would walk from the bus stop to the employee entrance, the one that squeaked in a way she loved. She would wave her ID badge, tiny badge her dad called it, and slip into the small supply room where she did homework until Caleb's shift ended. The room always smelled like bleach and floor wax. The fluorescent light buzzed like an irritated insect. The shelves groaned under stacks of paper towels and gallons of cleaning solution. Hazel had learned to do her math problems with the rhythmic tick-tick of dripping mop heads. Her father had 3 rules. 1. Be invisible. Don't cause trouble. 2. Help when you can. Don't get in the way. 3. Stay out of patient rooms always. Hazel tried her best, but the day the bleach smell grew too sharp and her eyes watered, she'd slipped into the hall for fresh air. She remembered pressing her back to the cool wall, taking a long, slow breath. And then she'd heard an explosion of grumbling from room 306. "This is not food," an old man barked. "This is a war crime in a cup." Green slime, green Hazel peeked around the corner. A nurse was backing out of the room holding an untouched tray. The Jell-O jiggled sadly under the harsh lights. The old man glared at it like it had personally wronged him. Hazel recognized the nurse, Miss Riley, who always smelled like cinnamon gum. Riley gave Hazel a tired smile. "Don't mind him, sweetheart. Colonel Maddox has opinions," Colonel Hazel whispered. "You'll hear him before you see him." Riley sighed. "He's harmless, just loud." Maddox shouted something else and Riley hurried off. Hazel stared at the Jell-O. She remembered her father's voice in her head. "Kindness isn't weakness, kid. Kindness is discipline." She wasn't supposed to talk to patients. She wasn't supposed to approach their rooms. But the green Jell-O looked lonely. And the old man looked lonely too. That night she went home, pulled out a recipe her teacher had sent home last Christmas, and tried her hand at lemon shortbread. The first batch tasted like warm chalk. The second was burnt. The third wasn't perfect, but it made the kitchen smell like summer, and Hazel decided that was good enough. The next day she slipped one cookie into a napkin, tucked it into her backpack, and made her way to room 306 with the stealth of a spy. The door creaked slightly when she pushed it open. Colonel Leonard Maddox glared at her from his bed. "Does this look like a playground?" he snapped. Scram! Hazel yelped and ran. That night she confessed to Caleb. He dropped the dish he was washing. "Hazel May Ward. You know the rules. You cannot go into patient rooms." "But he seemed sad," Hazel whispered, "and the Jell-O was green." Caleb pinched the bridge of his nose. "No more. Promise me." She promised. She also lied. The next day she slipped a cookie onto the table beside his bed and fled, her sneakers squeaking on the tile. But before she turned the corner she peeked back. The cookie was gone. She didn't hear him clearly, but she heard enough a raspy whisper, "Stubborn kid." Just like him. She didn't know who him was. She didn't know Colonel Maddox once commanded hundreds of soldiers. She didn't know he'd carry secrets heavier than metals. She only knew he ate her cookies. Hazel blinked, pulled back to reality by the quiet hum of the car engine. Caleb was still gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead, jaw tight. "Dad." He glanced at her through the mirror. "Yeah, honey, General Keaton. Why was she looking for me?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. His eyes softened, but his voice dropped to a cautious hush. "I don't know yet," he said. "But whatever it is, we're going to face it together." Hazel traced the lid of the tin in her lap. Inside, something slid a faint metallic clink. Caleb heard it. "What's that?" She hesitated. "Mr. Leo gave it to me." Caleb's brows drew together. He reached a hand back. "Let me see." She shook her head. "Not yet. I want to look myself first." There was no anger in Caleb's sigh, only worry. Outside, the hospital loomed behind them, humming with secrets. Hazel tightened her grip on the tin. And somewhere deep inside she felt something shift, as if Colonel Maddox had left her more than a box, as if he'd left her a message. For the next few days, Hazel carried the tin box everywhere inside her jacket, tucked under her pillow, resting beside her cereal bowl every morning. Caleb kept watching her with the quiet caution of a man who'd learned to expect storms even when the sky looked clear. He didn't press her. He didn't ask. But he listened. He always listened. Hazel, meanwhile, kept returning to the memories that had built the strange friendship she never expected to have. A friendship that began with fear and lemon shortbread and slowly changed into something much bigger. It had all started with the sound of room 306, the squeak of the door, the huff of an old soldier pretending he didn't care, the steady beep of the monitor like a metronome counting their minutes, and, most of all, the moment each afternoon when the hallway fell silent just long enough for one tiny ritual to begin. 3:30 p.m. Hazel didn't plan it. It simply happened. Every school day her steps would slow as she approached his room. She'd hold her breath until she heard the familiar grumble from inside. Then her tiny knock. Not really a knock, more like a tap. A whisper of knuckles against the metal door frame. He always barked first. "You again? Or what did you burn this time? Or the unforgettable? If this cookie kills me, tell the VA I went out fighting." But the moment Hazel set the napkin down beside his water cup, Colonel Leonard Maddox would fall silent. She'd watch him pretend he wasn't watching her. She'd watch him pretend he wasn't waiting for her, and she'd see the exact moment he gave in the faint rustling of the napkin as he picked up the cookie the second she turned her back. He never said thank you, not in the normal way. Instead, he complained. That was his language. "These are too sweet. My teeth will fall out. These are too dry. Are you trying to assassinate me? Or his personal favorite shortbread is supposed to crumble, kid, not disintegrate like cheap chalk." He ate every crumb. But the ritual wasn't just cookies. It was conversation, though neither of them ever called it that. Maddox asked questions, sharp ones, the kind that made Hazel feel older than 10. "How's your math coming? Your teacher's still giving you that nonsense busy work. How's your dad's leg? He still limps when he's tired." Hazel answered honestly. Always honestly. She didn't know how to lie to someone who stared straight through her like she was a freshly polished window. And over time, she found herself asking her own questions. "Why do you hate Jell-O so much? Why'd you call the nurse Rookie when she's older than my dad? Why don't you ever want visitors?" Maddox would snort, tug at the blanket, adjust his pillow with exaggerated annoyance, and mutter, "Too many questions for someone who barely reaches my shoulder." But then he would answer. Slowly, with that gruff, clipped voice that never softened but somehow felt gentle anyway. Most days he spoke about small things, his dislike for hospital food, the stupidity of bureaucracy, the glory days when men respected good boots and clean barracks. But sometimes his stories dipped into shadows. He talked about honor and how some men carried it like a shield while others wore it like a costume. He talked about responsibility, how it wasn't about orders or rank, but about looking someone in the eye and telling them the truth. And one day when Hazel shyly asked why lying was such a terrible thing, Maddox leaned closer and told her in a slow, gravelly whisper, "Because the wrong lie on the wrong piece of paper can kill a man twice." Hazel didn't understand. But she remembered the sound of those words, the weight in them, the way his voice trembled almost imperceptibly. She remembered feeling the room go quieter, as if even the machines were listening. He also began giving her tiny lessons disguised as jokes or offhand comments. How to recognize a bluff. How to judge someone by the way they held themselves. How sometimes the loudest person in the room was the weakest. One afternoon he reached under his pillow and tossed something toward her. It clinked against the mattress. A challenge coin worn smooth from decades of handling. "What's this for?" Hazel asked, turning it over between her small fingers. "A reminder," Maddox muttered. "People lie. Medals don't." Hazel didn't fully understand that either. But she tucked the coin into her backpack and treated it like treasure. And over time, she noticed something else. Maddox always made sure the chair beside his bed was turned slightly toward the door every day at 3:30. As if he were preparing for company he'd deny expecting. And Hazel noticed something in herself, too. She liked making him laugh even when the laugh sounded like a cough. She liked watching his eyes soften when she told him she'd passed a quiz. She liked the way he never treated her like a little kid even when she was 1. But everything changed the day his voice grew more serious than she'd ever heard it. She had already placed the cookie on his tray when he called out low and sharp. "Kid." Hazel stopped in the doorway. Yes, Mr. Leo Maddox waited until she was standing in the thin beam of light from the hall. His hand trembled slightly as he pointed toward her. If things go bad, and they will. He paused, breathing slow, trying to steady something inside himself. Remember, this not all uniforms are on the right side of the truth. Hazel swallowed. Everything inside her went still. Even at 10 years old, she could tell he wasn't talking about cookies or Jell-O or bad hospital blankets. He was warning her, and she wasn't sure who he was warning her about. Before she could ask, he closed his eyes, exhaling like the words had cost him something real. The memory ended there, but the fear, the instinctive, prickling fear, followed Hazel into the present like a shadow she couldn't outrun. She felt it now as she sat in the car beside her father. She felt it when she pressed the tin box to her chest, and she felt it strongest when she remembered the last thing Maddox ever said to her, "Pay attention, kid. One day, it'll matter." Hazel didn't yet know that the day had already arrived. Caleb had been in tense rooms before. War rooms, debrief rooms, court-martial hallways filled with whispered rumors and bad news. But nothing had the same weight as standing with his daughter in the small administrative office the VA staff had cleared for General Aurora Keaton. Hazel sat on the chair beside him, her sneakers not quite touching the floor, her hands folded tightly over the green tin box. The faint metallic click from inside echoed now and then as she shifted. Each sound tugged a new thread of worry through Caleb's chest. Aurora stood across from them, sleeves rolled up a stack of documents spread across the desk. She didn't look like the kind of officer you argued with. She looked like the kind of officer who could move mountains by sheer force of will. Caleb cleared his throat. "General, with all due respect, if this is about me or my daughter, I'd like to know why a 2-star had to come in person." Aurora didn't look up immediately. She finished signing something, closed the file, and only then lifted her gaze. Sharp, steady, the sort of gaze that dissected a man before he even opened his mouth. "This isn't about you, Mr. Ward," she said softly. "It's about Colonel Leonard Maddox. And his final directives." Hazel's fingers tightened around the tin. "His what?" Caleb asked. Aurora reached into a leather case and pulled out a packet of papers sealed and stamped with federal markings Caleb hadn't seen in years. Colonel Maddox filed a set of legal documents 3 weeks before his death. They were to be activated only if certain conditions were met. She paused, studying Hazel. Caleb stepped subtly in front of his daughter. What conditions? Aurora inhaled slowly. His death under what he described as likely contested circumstances. That sentence alone made Caleb's stomach knot. Aurora continued. "He named 3 parties involved in carrying out his final directives: myself, you, and your daughter." Hazel's voice came out small. "Me." The general's hard expression softened just a fraction. "Yes, Hazel. You." Caleb's jaw clenched. He barely knew her. Aurora's eyebrows lifted in a way that told him he was wrong, completely wrong. "On the contrary," she said, "Colonel Maddox spoke about her almost daily, and according to the nursing staff, he refused food medication and even physical therapy on days she didn't visit." Hazel blinked, stunned. "He did," Aurora nodded. She was his anchor in the last months of his life, his conscience, perhaps even his redemption. Caleb didn't like any of this. Not the implication, not the general's expression, not the sudden feeling that Maddox's warnings and his strange attachment to Hazel were about to explode into something much bigger. "Why us?" he demanded. "Why bring us into this? Because Maddox trusted you," Aurora said simply. "And I trust him." She tapped one final document on the desk. "And because he left something behind. For both of you." The next hour blurred into a whirlwind of instructions and signatures. Before Caleb fully understood what was happening, they were led through the sterile lobby of a federal office building. The marble floors echoed under their footsteps. Hazel clung to Caleb's arm, her gaze drifting nervously over metal detectors and security guards. Aurora walked a head badge clipped to her lapel boots, striking with purpose. Every door seemed to open before she even knocked. On the elevator ride up, the metal walls hummed with the movements of the cables. Hazel whispered, "Dad, what if they take the box?" Caleb leaned close. "Nobody's taking anything from you, honey." Aurora heard him. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked to Hazel's coat pocket. Something in her expression, something like recognition, passed quietly over her features. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a long hallway lined with framed flags and military emblems. A seal glinted on the carpet beneath their feet. United States Department of Defense. Aurora gestured them into a conference room. Inside, a large monitor glowed with a paused video. Colonel Leonard Maddox, in a hospital gown. Frail, thinner, but unmistakably himself. The sharp eyes, the set jaw, the stubborn posture of a man who never truly left the battlefield. Hazel let out a small gasp. Caleb rested a hand on her shoulder. Aurora pressed play. The recording crackled with static before Maddox's voice filled the room, rough but clear. "My name is Colonel Leonard Maddox, retired. If you're watching this, then I've kicked the bucket. Don't make a fuss about it." Hazel's breath shook. Maddox continued, more serious now. "I state that I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I'm doing." He lifted a document, tapping it. "I hereby designate the bulk of my estate to the Maddox Legacy Trust, and the primary beneficiary is Hazel Ward." Caleb's heart pounded. The hell, Aurora raised a calming hand, but Caleb shook his head, stunned. Maddox kept speaking. "She's the only person these last months who reminded me of the kind of soldier I used to be. She gave freely, expected nothing, and she made a grumpy old man a little less miserable." Hazel's eyes glistened. Maddox leaned closer to the camera. "And I appoint Caleb Ward as her guardian in all matters concerning this trust." Caleb felt like the air had been punched out of him. "And General Aurora Keaton Maddox finished will oversee the trust's execution and ensure the truth of Emberfall is corrected, even if it costs her." Caleb stiffened. Emberfall. Again. That cursed shadow. Aurora pressed pause. The room fell silent. Caleb turned to her. "What exactly is this? Why Emberfall? Why bring my daughter into this mess?" Aurora didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope addressed to her in Maddox's unmistakable handwriting. "This," she said quietly, "is why." She opened the envelope with steady fingers and read. Maddox's words were short, brutal, crystal clear. "You and I both know Emberfall was rewritten. You signed the amended report against my recommendation. Fix what we broke. Start with that janitor and his kid." Aurora closed the letter and looked at Caleb. Really looked at him. "Mr. Ward, Maddox left you in the center of a storm he knew was coming, and he left me responsible for navigating it." Before Caleb could respond, the conference room door swung open. A man in an expensive suit stepped inside, flanked by two relatives who looked equally displeased. His voice cut through the air like a blade dipped in ice. "General Keaton," he said, "will be contesting every line of that will." Caleb recognized the tone. He'd heard it from lawyers who came after injured soldiers. He'd heard it from men who believed money outweighed truth. Aurora didn't flinch. The man leaned in, smiling coldly. "This is just the beginning." The door slammed shut behind him with a hard thud, the kind that promised war. Sterling Cade did not raise his voice. Men like him never needed to. His power lived in the smoothness of his tone and the way he flipped a document with one lazy finger and the faint, satisfied hum he made when someone fidgeted across the table. He sat in his corner office suite high above downtown windows, stretching from floor to ceiling, the city below glittering like a steel mosaic. The Maddox family had taken over every chair available, dressed in expensive clothes that somehow still looked irritated. The air carried the faint scent of leather printer toner and the cold tang of ambition. Cade adjusted his cufflinks before speaking. "So, Colonel Maddox left everything to a janitor's child. A ripple of disgust passed through the room. That little girl, a woman scoffed. I saw her scrawny thing probably manipulated. Cade raised an eyebrow. Children rarely manipulate colonels. Adults do. He let the silence hang, then continued. Our strategy is simple. First, we petition for a TRO temporary restraining order to freeze all assets in the Maddox Legacy Trust. That buys us time. A man in a navy suit leaned forward. On what grounds? Cade's smile sharpened. Mental incompetence. If Maddox was confused medicated or influenced by, say, an emotionally needy child, and her father the will is contestable. And the janitor, someone asked. Cade enjoyed that question far too much. Caleb Ward. Yes. He opened a folder with a soft whump. His military record contains interesting irregularities. Emberfall, a black mark, and a man with a black mark is easy to paint as unstable, resentful, or opportunistic. A murmur of approval rolled through the room. And if that isn't enough, Cade added casually, we can raise CPS concerns. One of the relatives blinked. CPS, the Child Services People. Oh yes. Cade folded his hands. A single father with limited income, living modestly with a child now entangled in a multi-million-dollar estate dispute? That alone triggers red flags. We don't have to prove she's unsafe, just suggest it. The mood shifted, less outrage now, more anticipation. Cade leaned back in his chair, basking in the quiet dread he'd planted. It won't happen overnight, he said, but by the time I'm done, neither the janitor nor the little baker will be allowed near a penny of this estate. General Aurora Keaton had chosen a small legal office on the first floor of the federal building to speak privately with Caleb and Hazel. The room smelled like old binders, warm coffee, and the faint scent of floor polish. A single window hummed with the vibration of passing traffic. Aurora set her cap aside, flattened her palms on the desk, and leveled her gaze at them. This is going to be hard, she said. Cade is not a man who plays fair. Caleb crossed his arms, jaw tight. Then we don't give him anything to work with. Aurora shook her head. That's the problem. He doesn't need anything real. Hazel looked between them, small and silent fingers curled around the metal tin in her pocket. Aurora continued in a steadier tone. He will dig into Colonel Maddox's mental state. He'll question Hazel's motives. He'll scrutinize your military past. Her eyes lingered on Caleb, especially Emberfall. Caleb's expression didn't change, but a flicker passed through his eyes, something bruised, old, and unfinished. Aurora lowered her voice. If we're going to survive this legally, we need absolute transparency. No surprises. Hazel tugged on her father's sleeve. Are we in trouble? Caleb crouched beside her. No, honey. We're just in something complicated. He brushed a thumb across her knuckles. But we've been through hard things before. Hazel nodded slowly, though her shoulders stayed small and tense. Aurora pressed her lips together before adding, You'll both be called in for depositions soon. Cade will try to twist your words, all of them, and the moment he senses vulnerability, he'll go for it. Caleb straightened. Let him try. Aurora met his gaze. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. You remind me of Maddox when you say things like that. Caleb stiffened. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Aurora's eyes softened by a millimeter. Maddox trusted you, even when you didn't trust him, and he didn't trust many people. The quiet in the room deepened. Then Hazel's stomach rumbled softly. All three glanced at her. Hazel flushed. Sorry. It broke the tension just enough. Aurora exhaled. All right, let's wrap up for now. But before you leave, there's something you both should know. She reached into a folder and pulled out a thick envelope stamped with the court seal. A TRO has already been filed. The trust is frozen until the hearing." Caleb muttered a quiet curse. Aurora nodded. "Yes." Cade moved fast, faster than expected. Hazel blinked. "Frozen like ice." Aurora gave her a gentle nod. "Like ice, nobody can touch the money yet. Not Cade, not us either." Caleb rubbed his forehead. "Great." "And one more thing," Aurora added. Cade sent a message through his assistant. Caleb looked up. "What message?" Aurora's jaw tightened. "He said he'll be starting with you two, the janitor and the little baker." Hazel shrank into herself. Caleb's jaw flexed. He placed a protective hand on Hazel's shoulder. "He's not touching my kid," Caleb said quietly. "Not now, not ever." Aurora studied him for a long moment. Something unspoken crossed her features, something like reluctant respect. Then her phone buzzed. She scanned the screen, and her expression changed. "Caleb," she said carefully, "you need to answer this." He frowned. Why? Aurora turned the screen toward him. "Incoming call VA Hospital Administration CPS liaison requesting files. Hazel Ward." Caleb's breath left him in a slow, disbelieving exhale. Hazel looked up confused. "Dad, what's CPS?" The room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too full of echoes. Aurora spoke quietly, almost regretfully. "It means Cade has already made his first move." Hazel clutched Caleb's arm. Caleb stood perfectly still, but every muscle in his body trembled like a man bracing for impact. The war had begun, and Cade had chosen his battlefield. The room chosen for the deposition felt like a place built to make people nervous. It was too bright, too quiet, too cold. A single recorder sat in the center of the long conference table, its red light blinking with an unblinking patience that made Hazel's stomach twist. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air conditioner rattled somewhere in the wall. The clicking of a stenographer's keyboard echoed like tiny hammers tapping on glass. Caleb sat on one side of the table, shoulders squared, jaw tight. Hazel sat beside him, swinging her feet just an inch above the floor, clutching the green tin box on her lap like it was a life jacket. Aurora stood behind them, hands clasped behind her back, not in uniform, yet somehow still carrying the weight of one. Sterling Cade entered the room without hurry. His confidence arrived 1 second before he did. "Good afternoon," he said, voice smooth as oiled steel. "Shall we begin?" He didn't wait for an answer. He sat, opened a folder with ceremonial calm, and pressed the record button. "This is the deposition of Mr. Caleb Ward," he announced. "Date and time stamped. Counsel present. Let the record show the witness has been advised of his rights." Caleb nodded once silently. Cade leaned forward. "Mr. Ward, he began you served in the Army for how many years? 12? Caleb replied, "And during that time you participated in multiple operations, including one in particular, Operation Emberfall." The name landed like a weight on the table. Caleb felt Hazel shift beside him. He didn't look at her. He didn't dare. "Yes," Caleb said. Cade slid a paper across the table. "This report states that your unit suffered heavy casualties during Emberfall. It also states that certain mistakes were made." He tapped the page. Tap, tap, tap. A soft rhythm meant to unnerve. Caleb's voice stayed level. "War is full of mistakes." "Indeed." Cade's smile curled. "But according to this version of the report, those mistakes were largely attributed to you, your decisions, your actions." Aurora stiffened behind them. Caleb inhaled through his nose, slow and steady. "That report was altered," he said quietly. "Do you have proof of that?" Cade asked, deceptively polite. Caleb didn't look at Aurora, didn't look at Hazel. "No." Cade made a sympathetic sound, performative and sharp at the edges. "Let's move on," he said, "to Colonel Maddox." "You knew him well. I cleaned his room," Caleb replied. "That's it. No conversations. No personal discussions, no influence. Perhaps Hazel's fingers dug into the tin box. Caleb shook his head. He barely tolerated me. And yet, Cade flipped another paper. He entrusted his entire estate to your daughter, a minor, a vulnerable child, and placed you as guardian. Curious, isn't it? Caleb didn't blink. He had his reasons, which were… Caleb met Cade's gaze evenly. Ask him. Cade chuckled. Unfortunately, he's dead, Mr. Ward. Caleb said nothing. The silence thickened. Cade leaned back. Let the record show that the witness appears evasive. Aurora snapped objection. But Cade cut her off with a silky "noted." He turned toward Hazel. And now, the little baker. Hazel swallowed hard. Aurora stepped forward. She does not speak without her father present. She's 10, Cade replied with mock concern. We'll keep it gentle. He turned the recorder slightly in Hazel's direction. Hazel, he said kindly, did you know Colonel Maddox was a very wealthy man? Hazel blinked. No, sir. Cade's tone softened. Did you ever hope he'd give you something money toys? Maybe a house. Hazel wrinkled her nose. No. Cade pressed, not even a little. No, she repeated. I just didn't want him to eat green jello alone. The stenographer paused mid-keystroke as a few witnesses shifted in their chairs. Cade blinked once, thrown off. Just slightly. He regrouped quickly. Did your father tell you to bring him cookies? Hazel shook her head. Dad told me not to, so you disobeyed him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Only because Mr. Leo yelled at the food tray. And… He looked lonely. Cade's smile slipped for a fraction of a second. Aurora stared at Hazel with something like pride. Caleb reached under the table and squeezed Hazel's hand. She squeezed back. Cade exhaled slowly, then closed his folder. No further questions for the child. But he wasn't done. The moment Hazel left the room with a staff member, Cade turned back to Caleb. Mr. Ward, let's discuss your living situation. Caleb braced himself. Your income is modest, Cade said. Your apartment is humble. Your daughter spends hours alone at the hospital while you work. Is that correct? Caleb's jaw flexed. She's safe there. And yet Cade continued. She wandered into a patient's room repeatedly. Alone. Unsupervised. Against hospital policy. Caleb inhaled through his teeth. And now, Cade said, voice floating just above a whisper, she is the center of a multi-million-dollar dispute. That is not a safe environment, wouldn't you agree? Caleb's voice was quiet. Dangerous. You don't get to talk about my daughter. Oh, Cade murmured. But CPS already is. The recorder clicked off. The room felt colder. Caleb returned to the VA hospital to pick up a forgotten backpack Hazel had left in the supply room. The halls were dim now, the machines quieter, the footsteps fewer. He passed room 306 and felt a pinch in his chest. Maddox's empty bed flashed in his mind, bare mattress, cold frame silence. He inhaled. He wasn't ready to lose anything else. As he turned a corner toward the supply closet, he saw a faint glow from the chapel. A small sanctuary tucked between two wings of the hospital, often ignored. Tonight, someone sat in the front pew. Aurora. But not the Aurora he'd seen in uniform. Not the officer with sharp orders and steady boots. This version sat hunched forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped around something, a coin that glinted faintly in the low light. Her breathing was uneven. Caleb approached slowly. General Aurora flinched, then wiped at her eyes more roughly than necessary. Sorry, she muttered. Didn't think anyone came in here. Caleb sat beside her without asking. You all right, Aurora? Let out a brittle laugh. No, not remotely. She stared at the coin. I signed the Emberfall report, the altered one. I didn't know it was altered at the time, but I didn't fight it either. Maddox did. I didn't. Caleb stayed quiet. Aurora's voice cracked. I helped ruin a man's career. Yours. The confession hung thick in the chapel air. The hum of a vending machine down the hall seemed too loud, too alive. Caleb exhaled. "You made a mistake." Aurora shook her head. "I betrayed my duty?" Caleb studied her trembling hands, her shallow breaths. His training kicked in without thought. "Grounding. 5 things you can see," he said softly. Aurora looked at him startled. Now he repeated. 5. She swallowed. "The cross, the hymn book, your jacket, the coin, the candle. 4 things you can touch." She placed her palm on the wooden pew, the bench, the floor, the back of my neck. "This coin. 3 things you can hear." Aurora closed her eyes. "The air vent, a nurse's shoes squeaking, and your breathing." Caleb nodded. "Good." Her shoulders loosened, her breaths steadied. Silence settled gentle this time. Then Caleb's phone vibrated. A text message from his neighbor. "CPS is at your door. They're asking about Hazel. Hurry." The chapel lights buzzed faintly. Aurora's eyes widened. Caleb felt the world tilt beneath him. The real blow had landed. Caleb had never driven faster in his life without breaking a single traffic law. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. The streetlights streaked across the windshield like thin, frantic lines. Each one punctuated the same thought: not Hazel, not my girl, not again. Aurora sat beside him, her breath steady but shallow phone still in her hand. She had insisted on coming. Caleb didn't argue. He was too focused on the knot of fear tightening inside his ribs like a fist. Hazel slept in the back seat, curled against her backpack, unaware of the storm gathering. Caleb kept glancing at her reflection in the mirror as if making sure she hadn't vanished. "CPS doesn't show up at night unless someone pushed hard," Aurora murmured. "I know who," Caleb answered, voice low. "Cade." Aurora didn't deny it. The apartment complex came into view, age-worn, quiet, a few porch lights flickering. The building had a lived-in smell of detergent, old carpet, and comfort. Caleb parked, stepped out, and the cool night air scraped his lungs. At the bottom of the stairs stood a woman and a police officer. The woman held a thin folder and a badge clipped to her jacket. CPS. Caleb swallowed hard, wiped his palms on his jeans, and lifted Hazel from the car seat. She stirred, confused. "Dad." "Just stay with me," he whispered. Inside the apartment, the CPS caseworker Ms. Thompson spoke in a tone practiced to the point of numbness, professional, almost weary. "Mr. Ward, thank you for cooperating. I'm required to assess Hazel's living situation due to an anonymous report." Aurora's eyebrow twitched. "Anonymous," she repeated. "How convenient." Ms. Thompson didn't acknowledge the tone. "We received information that Hazel is currently involved in a highly contentious legal matter involving a significant inheritance. There are concerns she may be at risk of exploitation." Caleb exhaled slowly. Hazel was friends with a veteran. She brought him cookies. Ms. Thompson opened her folder. There are also allegations that Hazel was frequently unsupervised in a hospital environment. Caleb tensed. "I was working. She was allegations," Ms. Thompson repeated, calm. "We just need to verify her safety." Hazel, standing small beside the table, hugged her tin box to her chest. Aurora stepped forward, voice steady. Ms. Thompson Hazel was not wandering. She was visiting a patient who specifically requested her presence, a decorated colonel. The officer shifted his weight slightly. Ms. Thompson sighed. "Let's take a look around, please." Caleb nodded stiffly. "Go ahead." The caseworker moved slowly through the apartment. Her pen scratched against the checklist. Hazel's bedroom, tiny but clean. The art supplies in the corner, old but neatly stacked. The fridge, modest but full. The living room, small but warm. Everything was honest, humble, real. But Caleb saw the way Miss Thompson hesitated at the peeling paint near the window, at the tear in the carpet, at the aging water heater that rattled whenever the pipes warmed. None of it dangerous, but all of it vulnerable. Cade had chosen his battlefield well. Hazel followed Caleb closely, whispering, "Dad, am I in trouble?" He knelt in front of her, brushing her hair gently behind her ear. "No, absolutely not. You did nothing wrong." Her voice wobbled. "Are they going to take me?" Caleb's heart clenched so tightly it hurt to breathe. "No," he promised. "No one is taking you." Behind them, Aurora watched, hands clasped behind her jaw tight. Her eyes were colder than steel, the kind of cold that came from guilt and determination bleeding into each other. When Ms. Thompson returned to the kitchen, she closed the folder with a soft snap. "Mr. Ward," she said carefully, due to the ongoing legal dispute, and because Hazel has become the beneficiary of what appears to be a multi-million-dollar trust, CPS is required to consider temporary protective placement, while we— Number Caleb's voice cracked through the room like a whip. The officer straightened. Ms. Thompson lifted a hand. "Please, Mr. Ward, I need you to know." Caleb repeated, quieter but harder. "She's staying with me." The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, please keep your voice." Aurora stepped forward so fast the officer instinctively rested his hand on his holster. She flashed her military ID. "General Aurora Keaton, U.S. Army. I am legally named in Colonel Maddox's directives as supervisor of the trust and protector of the minor. Hazel Ward is under my authority." Her voice dropped into something lethal. "Stand down." Ms. Thompson blinked. "General, that is not how civilian jurisdiction." Aurora held up a fax still warm from printing stamped with a judge's signature. "This is a temporary stay order granted through federal channels. Hazel remains with her father until a full hearing." Ms. Thompson took the paper with trembling fingers. I wasn't informed." "That's because it was filed 10 minutes ago," Aurora said. "Expedited." Hazel let out a tiny breath like she'd been holding it her entire life. Caleb sagged in relief, but only for a moment. Ms. Thompson finally nodded. "Very well. Hazel may stay for now. But the investigation continues." "We understand," Aurora replied, tone controlled. The officer relaxed. Ms. Thompson offered a thin, sympathetic smile. Then they left. The door clicked shut behind them. Hazel collapsed into Caleb's arms, tears finally spilling. "Dad, I was so scared." "I know, honey. I know." He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "You're safe. You're right here." Aurora turned away discreetly, giving them space. She stared at the wall, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep, unsteady breath. When Hazel finally fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion pulling her under, Caleb draped a blanket over her. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt tender and bruised at the same time. Aurora sat at the kitchen table, elbows on her knees, rubbing her temples. "Caleb," she whispered, "I'm suspended." He looked up sharply. "What for intervening tonight?" She forced a humorless breath. "My chain of command didn't appreciate me using military resources on a civilian protective matter." Caleb leaned against the counter, studying her. "You did the right thing," he said. Maybe Aurora muttered. "But it cost me. And it's not over." Caleb nodded slowly. "Cade won't stop." No, Aurora agreed. He won't. She stared at Hazel's sleeping form, the small green tin tucked under her arm. Then something shifted in her expression, something like realization. "Caleb." She whispered that box. Maddox meant something by it. Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" Hazel stirred in her sleep. The tin box tilted. A folded piece of paper slipped out and fluttered onto the floor. Caleb picked it up. Hazel blinked awake and whispered, "Dad." Mr. Leo left us a puzzle. The tin clinked. A coin rolled across the table. Aurora and Caleb exchanged a look, one full of fear, curiosity, and something else. The sense that the storm was only beginning. The apartment felt different after the CPS visit, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Hazel slept curled on the couch, one hand resting protectively over the tin box, breathing slow with the exhaustion of a child who had fought a battle she never should have faced. Caleb watched her for a long moment before turning back to the kitchen table. Aurora sat there beneath the dim, overhead light sleeves, rolled up the tension in her shoulders sharp enough to cut through the room. Between them, the open tin box, a challenge coin, a folded scrap of paper, a small black USB drive taped to the bottom. Aurora exhaled. Maddox didn't leave random trinkets. Everything he did had purpose. Caleb nodded. Then we figure out what he wanted us to see. Hazel stirred eyelids fluttering. I can help, she whispered groggily. Caleb knelt at her side. Honey, you need rest. You've been through enough tonight. Hazel shook her head stubbornly. Mister, Leo left it for me. He wanted me to. She slid off the couch, dragging her blanket behind her, and climbed into the chair beside Aurora. Please. Caleb and Aurora exchanged a silent look. Hazel wasn't going back to sleep. Not until this was done. Hazel laid the scrap of paper flat on the table. It was lined, torn from a notebook, edges frayed. On it were rows of dates, types of cookies, and short markings. Caleb stared. Looks like nonsense. Aurora leaned closer. Or code. Hazel perked up. He gave me lemon cookies on days he asked me about Dad. Chocolate chip when he asked about school. Shortbread when he talked about serious things. Caleb blinked. You remember all that? Hazel nodded. I didn't realize it was a pattern until now. Aurora straightened shock sparking across her face. Maddox loved position codes. L for lemon, C for chocolate chip, S for shortbread. The dates are the sequence. He gave us a password, built on a child's cookie schedule. Caleb grabbed a pencil. Let's map it out. For the next 30 minutes, the apartment filled with whispers and pencil strokes. Hazel added memory, Aurora added structure. Bit by bit, the letters aligned. The final password was pieced together simple but unmistakably Maddox's style. Caleb took the USB from the tin. The plastic was warm from Hazel's hand. He lifted his laptop from the counter and set it on the table. The computer hummed awake. All right, Caleb murmured. Moment of truth. He plugged in the USB. A single file appeared locked. Enter. Password. Hazel whispered the answer. Caleb typed it in. A soft click sounded. The file opened. Inside were folders, hundreds of documents, emails, incident logs, time-stamped entries Maddox must have collected and hidden over years. Aurora's breath quickened. My God. Caleb clicked a video file. The screen filled with desert sun and grainy footage. Soldiers crouched behind a transport vehicle. Maddox's younger face appeared, eyes fierce dust clinging to his beard. Aurora watched, frozen. The audio was faint but clear enough. A younger Maddox spoke through the static. They're rewriting the report. They're blaming the wrong man. They're protecting the contractor and covering for command. If anything happens to me, the truth is here. Don't let it die. Another soldier appeared briefly in the frame. Caleb. Younger. Formidable. Worn down. Aurora's voice cracked. They erased this. And pinned the mess on me, Caleb said quietly. His hands trembled not from rage but from something deeper. Vindication. Fear. Relief. A combination that tasted sharp at the back of his throat. Hazel whispered, Mr. Leo saved it. For you. Aurora closed her eyes. For all of us. She opened a second file, an email chain between senior officers discussing how to redirect accountability and ensure contractors don't lose federal renewals. Aurora read faster, jaw tightening. Then she found it her own signature on an altered version of the report. Her voice dropped. I signed this without reading the original. Maddox told me to slow down. I didn't listen. Caleb looked at her not with anger, but with clarity. You didn't know. Aurora whispered, "But I should have." Hazel hugged her blanket around her shoulders. "Mr. Leo wanted you to fix it, General. That's why he sent you that letter." Aurora's eyes glistened, but she nodded. She closed the laptop gently. "We can't do this alone. We need legal protection. We need someone outside Cade's influence. But first," she looked at Caleb, "we need to decide if we're willing to use this. If we bring it forward, very powerful people will get very angry." Caleb inhaled deeply. Then he glanced at Hazel, at the girl whose kindness had started all of this. "They already came after my kid," he said, "so I'm done being afraid." Aurora studied him for a long moment. Then she reached for the USB, gripping it until her knuckles whitened. "Then we go to war," she whispered. "The right way this time." The apartment seemed to hold its breath. Hazel placed her small hand over theirs. "We'll fix it," she said softly. The three of them sat there united by a fallen soldier, a broken truth, and a little girl's courage. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper-polished wood and tension thick enough to taste. It was early morning, yet the hallway outside courtroom 4B buzzed with the low hum of whispers, lawyers murmuring strategies, journalists adjusting microphones, relatives of Colonel Maddox muttering indignantly. Hazel held Caleb's hand as they walked through the metal detector, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. The tin box stayed inside Caleb's backpack, hidden from curious eyes, but Hazel could feel its weight like a heartbeat. Aurora led the way, her steps calm and measured. Though she wore a civilian suit, navy simple, understated, she carried herself with the commanding presence of a woman who once held 2 stars on her shoulder. Even without the uniform, people instinctively stepped aside. Today's hearing combined 2 storms, the probate challenge over Maddox's will and the preliminary admission of evidence regarding Emberfall, both intertwined more tightly than most would ever understand. Inside the courtroom, the air was chilled, the hum of fluorescent lights steady. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a voice roughened by decades of courtroom battles, adjusted his reading glasses as everyone took their seats. Caleb squeezed Hazel's shoulder. "Just breathe, kiddo." She nodded, but her legs swung nervously under the bench. Across the room sat Sterling Cade and the Maddox relative's sharp suits, sharp eyes, sharper intentions. Cade looked like a man prepared for a performance he had rehearsed thousands of times. He rose first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "we are here to contest the validity of a will created by an elderly man in failing health. A man who was emotionally manipulated by a 10-year-old girl and her father, a janitor with a questionable military past." Hazel stiffened. Cade continued unhurried, savoring each word like a blade drawn slowly. Colonel Maddox was not of sound mind when he altered his estate plan. He had formed an unhealthy attachment to the child. And Mr. Ward, whose record contains troubling irregularities, particularly concerning Operation Emberfall, stood to gain significantly. Their involvement compromises the will. He rested his hand on the podium fingers, tapping lightly. "We request the court to void the document." A murmur rippled through the room. Hazel's chest tightened. The judge adjusted his glasses. "We will hear from the other side." Aurora rose. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She simply spoke with clarity that quieted the room. "Your Honor, Colonel Maddox made his decision freely, and he took deliberate steps to ensure his wishes were honored, even anticipating that his family and their attorney would attempt to undermine them." Cade scoffed audibly, but Aurora continued. "He recorded a detailed video outlining his intentions. He filed legal directives weeks before his passing. He named 3 individuals he trusted to carry out his final wishes." She gestured to Hazel and Caleb. "And these 2 were chosen not because of manipulation, but because of kindness." Hazel blinked up at her. Aurora placed her palm lightly on Hazel's shoulder as she passed, and Hazel felt stronger. Furthermore, Aurora said, turning back to the judge, We have evidence relevant to Mr. Cade's claims evidence concerning Operation Emberfall. Cade shot to his feet. Objection, irrelevant to the will. It is relevant, Aurora countered. Because Mr. Cade and his clients have repeatedly weaponized Mr. Ward's military record to paint him as unstable. We can disprove that today. The judge considered this, then nodded. Proceed. Aurora stepped aside. Your Honor, Hazel Ward would like to make a statement. Hazel's heart skipped. She hadn't known this part, but she stood legs shaking and walked to the witness chair. The bailiff held a tiny Bible out of habit, not realizing Hazel had never sworn an oath before. She placed her hand on it, voice trembling. I promise to tell the truth. She sat, feet dangling, and Cade approached with the same predatory calm he had used during the deposition. Hazel, he began. Voice syrup. Sweet, Colonel Maddox gave you gifts, didn't he? Hazel frowned. Just a coin. He gave you money, didn't he? No. He promised you things. No. Cade leaned closer. So why did you keep visiting him? Hazel thought of the green jello, of Maddox's loneliness, of the way he called her stubborn, of the way he saved everything for her. He gave money to people in uniforms, Hazel said softly. But he gave me stories, and time, and one old coin. That's it. The courtroom rustled an emotional shift neither side could deny. Cade stepped back, jaw tight. Aurora approached next. Hazel, what did Colonel Maddox tell you about the truth? Hazel swallowed. He said sometimes people in uniforms aren't on the right side of it. The judge leaned forward slightly. Aurora nodded. Thank you, Hazel. Hazel stepped down, returning to Caleb's side. He placed his arm around her, pulling her close. Then Aurora faced the judge again. Your Honor, the defense submits a USB drive containing original Emberfall documentation collected and preserved by Colonel Maddox. These files have been authenticated by the Inspector General's office. The courtroom shifted. Even Cade's posture faltered. The judge gestured. Let's see it. A clerk connected the laptop to the projector. The screen filled with desert sunlight. A younger Maddox appeared firm, resolute. Next to him, Caleb Ward, dusty and exhausted. And Maddox's voice spoke through static. They're rewriting the report. They are shifting the blame. The truth is here. My men deserve better. Cade stood abruptly. This is fabricated. A representative from the Inspector General's office rose in the gallery. It's authentic, she said firmly. Metadata timestamps signatures this file matches records once believed destroyed. The altered report is the fabrication. The judge turned slowly toward the Maddox family. Aurora walked back to the podium. She inhaled deeply. Your Honor, I signed the altered report years ago. I believed it was accurate at the time. Colonel Maddox tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I am here to correct my mistake and restore the honor of the soldier Mr. Cade has spent weeks trying to smear. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her for the first time without anger. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. Court will recess before I deliver my decision. The entire courtroom exhaled, some in dread, some in hope. As everyone rose, Cade shot Caleb a venomous glance. Caleb didn't flinch. Hazel tugged his hand. Dad, did we win? Caleb knelt to meet her eyes, voice steady. We told the truth, he said. That's winning enough for now. But as they walked out of the courtroom, one thing became unmistakably clear. Whatever the judge would rule next, everything had changed. The judge's chambers buzzed with distant voices behind the thick wooden door, but inside courtroom 4B it felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Hazel sat on the bench between Caleb and Aurora, her legs tucked close, her small fingers locked around the green tin box like it was the only anchor she had. Every shuffle of paper, every cough, every creak of the courtroom benches. It all sounded too loud. Then the door opened. Judge Halverson stepped back into the room, his robe trailing behind him, his expression unreadable. The bailiff called everyone to rise. A wave of rustling fabric and nervous breaths filled the air. Hazel felt Caleb's hand settle reassuringly on her back. The judge sat. "Be seated." Silence dropped sharply. He lifted a thick folder. The pages, Maddox's will, the USB report, the Emberfall documents looked impossibly small in his hands, but the weight of them pressed across the entire room. "I have reviewed the evidence presented," he began, voice deep and steady, including Colonel Maddox's directives, the forensic verification of the Emberfall files, and testimonies given. Cade curled his fingers around his pen knuckles white. The judge continued. "Colonel Leonard Maddox was of sound mind when he executed his estate plan." A breath left Hazel's chest in a trembling rush. "His video declaration is clear, voluntary, and consistent with the supporting documentation. There is no evidence, none, that he was coerced by Mr. Ward or the minor child." Cade sank slowly back into his seat. Judge Halverson turned a page. "Therefore, the court upholds the validity of the Maddox Legacy Trust." Hazel felt Caleb stiffen beside her. Aurora straightened just slightly like a soldier receiving long-awaited orders. The primary beneficiary remains Hazel Ward. Guardianship remains with her father, Mr. Caleb Ward. Oversight of the trust is granted to General Aurora Keaton per Colonel Maddox's explicit request. A stunned hush filled the courtroom. And, furthermore, the judge said, voice cooling into something sharper, the court finds that the challenge to the will was pursued with reckless disregard for the minor's well-being. Hazel's eyes widened. Caleb blinked. "What does that mean?" Aurora whispered. "It means Cade overplayed his hand." Judge Halverson wasn't done. As for the allegations raised against Mr. Ward, particularly concerning his military service, this court cannot ignore the newly authenticated Emberfall files. Cade's face drained of color. The Inspector General has confirmed that the altered Emberfall report was fraudulent. Mr. Ward's name was wrongfully associated with actions he did not commit. Caleb's breath broke on a quiet exhale. His eyes fell closed for a moment, not out of exhaustion, but out of release. A weight he had carried for years finally fell away. In recognition of these findings, the judge said, "Mr. Ward's military record will be formally corrected, effective immediately." The courtroom shifted again, this time with murmurs of surprise, gratitude, disbelief. Hazel squeezed her father's hand. "Dad." "You're cleared." Caleb swallowed hard. "Yeah, kiddo. Looks like it." Judge Halverson lifted his gaze toward the back of the room. Regarding the involvement of Child Protective Services, all claims suggesting Hazel Ward was unsafe in her father's care are hereby dismissed. The court finds them malicious and unfounded. One of the Maddox relatives gasped. Cade stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The judge placed the folder down, hands firmly atop it. "Let it be known this court will not tolerate the use of child welfare systems as weapons in property disputes." Hazel felt her father's arm wrap around her shoulders. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was steady, strong, full of quiet gratitude. And finally, the judge added, "I strongly advise the Maddox family to reconsider any further legal action. Pursuing this matter further may expose them to sanctions." A beat. This hearing is concluded. The gavel struck. A single sharp note that echoed like a gunshot, then dissolved into a rising swell of murmurs. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun felt warmer than Hazel remembered. The courthouse steps stretched downward like a runway, guiding them toward a future she didn't yet understand, but this time she didn't feel scared. Caleb inhaled deeply, shoulders lifting, then softening as though for the first time in years he could breathe all the way down to his bones. Hazel tugged his sleeve. "Are we really okay now?" Caleb knelt, cupping her face gently. "Yeah, honey, we're finally okay." Hazel hugged him so tightly that his breath hitched. Aurora stepped back to give them space, watching quietly, her eyes softer than Hazel had ever seen. Hazel called out, "General, come here." Aurora blinked, taken off guard. "Me." Hazel grabbed her hand and pulled her closer. "Your family now." Aurora's posture faltered just for a second. Something warm flickered through her expression, disarming the stern precision she always carried. "Thank you, Hazel," she murmured. A voice cleared behind them. Inspector General Ramirez approached Aurora with a thin folder. "General Keaton, the Army appreciates your efforts to bring clarity to Emberfall. You won't face disciplinary action. In fact," she gave a small approving nod, "your integrity will be noted in your file." Aurora's breath caught quiet but profound. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. Ramirez stepped away, leaving Aurora frozen in place, relieved, shocked, humbled. When the last reporters faded from the steps, Caleb and Aurora found themselves alone at the bottom, Hazel skipping ahead a few feet. Aurora sighed. "I don't expect forgiveness for what happened years ago." Caleb studied her. Not with blame, not with anger. With forgiveness, he said quietly, "You don't expect it. You just try to deserve it." Aurora let out a small, unsteady laugh. "That sounds like something Maddox would have said." Caleb shook his head. No, he would have added more swearing. For the first time, Aurora smiled wide enough that it touched her eyes. Before she could speak, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a rolled blueprint. "Maddox drafted this years ago," she said. "A new wing for the VA. Something he wanted you and Hazel to be part of." She unrolled it. At the top, in faded ink, Maddox Ward Veteran Healing Center. Caleb stared at it, his throat tightening. Aurora met his gaze. "Are you in?" Her voice held no command. No rank. Just hope. Caleb looked at Hazel, who grinned and nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah," he said softly. "We're in." 6 months later, the VA Medical Center no longer sounded like the place Hazel once knew, no longer just humming machines or carts creaking in dim corridors. The new wing carried a different rhythm. Warm voices, soft laughter, the clink of coffee mugs. A guitar being tuned by a veteran in the corner. And somewhere down the hallway, someone was telling a story that made a room full of old soldiers chuckle. The Maddox Ward Veteran Healing Center had opened its doors. Sunlight filtered through wide new windows, spreading across fresh floors that didn't echo with loneliness. The building smelled of brewed coffee sawdust from the woodworking room and the faint citrus scent of the cleaning solution Hazel had helped Caleb choose. Hazel stood at the front lobby, now wearing a simple sky-colored dress. A ribbon lay across her lap as she sat on a small stool, waiting nervously for her cue. On the table beside her was a silver tray piled high with lemon shortbread cookies perfectly shaped golden and made with the same recipe that had once come out lopsided and uneven. Except today they were beautiful. Today mattered. Caleb knelt beside his daughter, adjusting the ribbon on her dress. "You ready, kiddo?" Hazel nodded. "Do you think Mr. Leo would like it?" Caleb's smile was warm and tired and full all at once. He'd say they're too sweet? He chuckled, and then he'd eat half the tray before the ceremony even started. Hazel giggled, and for a moment she wasn't the girl who had sat trembling during court hearings or cried into a couch blanket while CPS knocked on her door. She was just a child again. A child who had made cookies for an old soldier who once barked at green jello. A murmur of conversation swept the room as the small crowd settled. Veterans in faded jackets, nurses, administrators, families, even a few reporters all gathered beneath a new plaque mounted on the wall. The Maddox Ward Veteran Healing Center, in honor of Colonel Leonard Maddox. And the kindness that changed everything, Aurora Keaton stood at the podium wearing a charcoal suit that fit her with effortless poise. Her hair was pulled back, but without the sharp severity she once carried. Her posture was straight, but today her shoulders held ease instead of armor. When she spoke, her voice carried through the room like a low, steady bell. "Thank you all for being here for the dedication of this new center. Colonel Maddox believed that healing doesn't end with a discharge. He believed that soldiers carry invisible wounds and that the right kind of support could change a life. She looked directly at Hazel with a gentle smile. He learned that lesson from a 10-year-old girl who baked cookies when he least deserved compassion and most needed it. Hazel's cheeks turned pink. Aurora continued her tone deepening. And this center exists because of that same act of kindness. Because sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures but with small courage, with time, with patience, with showing up for someone who is hurting. Hazel felt a sudden warmth behind her eyes. Aurora raised a hand toward the crowd. And because of this family, Caleb and Hazel Ward, a legacy lives on. People clapped soft and heartfelt. Then the nurse in charge of the ribbon approached Hazel. "It's time, sweetheart." Hazel stood clutching the scissors with both hands. Caleb placed his hands over hers to steady them. Together, father and daughter, they cut the ribbon. The room erupted in applause as Hazel bowed shyly and held up a lemon shortbread cookie like a trophy. The lobby overflowed with chatter and the aroma of cookies. Veterans sampled Hazel's baking with approving grumbles. "Better than the chow hall," one joked. "Better than my ex-wife's cooking," another announced, earning laughs. Caleb walked through the crowd wearing a new name badge, Caleb Ward, Veteran Liaison. He greeted old soldiers with the easy warmth of someone who had finally reclaimed his place among them. He listened to their stories, helped them fill out forms, pointed them to the art therapy room and PTSD support wing he'd helped design. He moved slowly, thoughtfully, at peace. Meanwhile, Hazel carried a tray of cookies from person to person, offering them with the same tenderness she once offered Maddox. Each thank you she received felt like a small light flickering inside her chest. Across the room, Aurora watched them both with quiet pride before slipping toward the exit. She paused at the door to adjust her coat, but froze when Hazel called after her. "General." Aurora turned. Hazel ran up and pressed a cookie into her hand. "For you," Hazel said. "Mr. Leo would want you to have one." Aurora's throat tightened. "Thank you, Hazel." Caleb joined them, leaning one shoulder against the door frame. "You're not leaving early, are you?" "Just getting some air," Aurora said softly. "Crowds are still a little much." Caleb gave a knowing nod. "I get that." They stood there a moment, listening to the faint clatter of chairs, murmured conversation, and the soft rustling of veterans settling into the new wing. Then Hazel tugged their hands. "Come see something." The veteran cemetery stretched across a wide field, rows and rows of white headstones standing in solemn formation. The winter air carried the crisp scent of pine. The flag overhead flapped gently, slow, steady, dignified. Hazel walked between Caleb and Aurora, her boots crunching on the gravel path. They reached Colonel Maddox's headstone. Hazel knelt, placing one perfect lemon shortbread cookie on the smooth white marble. Beside it, she set the old challenge coin he had given her months ago. She whispered, "We cracked your code, Mr. Leo, and we're taking care of your friends now." The breeze stirred gently as if answering. Aurora stepped back, hands clasped before her. Caleb stood with one hand in his pocket, the other resting on Hazel's shoulder. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Silence felt right here soft, grateful, full of things better felt than said. After a long moment, Hazel rose and took both their hands. "Come on," she said quietly. "We still have cookies to deliver at the center." They started walking back, 3 silhouettes crossing between rows of fallen heroes. A father, a daughter, a soldier trying to make something right. A family built not by blood, but by kindness. Kindness is not weakness. It is discipline. It is courage. And sometimes, it is the spark that rebuilds a life. Wherever you are listening from tonight, may you remember the last time a simple act of kindness changed someone's world. And may you be brave enough to do it again. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Before we go, I want to leave you with one simple truth, something at the heart of this entire journey. Kindness is not small. Kindness is a force that can outlive us. Sometimes it's a cookie in a hospital hallway. Sometimes it's a moment of courage when no one is watching. Sometimes it's choosing to do the right thing, even when the world is telling you to walk away. If this story touched something in your heart, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life, or experienced a moment that restored your faith in people? Please share your story in the comments. Your words might be the message someone else needs today. And before you go, let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing this little storytelling family grow from all corners of the world. If you enjoyed this story, if it brought you comfort or hope, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next journey. Thank you truly for spending your time here. Thank you for supporting these long-form healing stories. And thank you for keeping kindness alive in a world that needs it more than ever. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.